Good morning. It is Thursday. I'm Joel Fieri, and who else is here? Gary. Gary, I should always know you're the first one here. Good morning. How are you doing? See who else comes in for today, this morning. What I was going to talk about today is a couple weeks ago, or I guess I did last week. I did a podcast on men and society. Men. There's AC. Good morning. Just want to kind of follow up a little bit on my podcast from last week where I talked about how men were leaving the Democratic Party and then how the church will respond to that, how that will be mirrored by the church, whether the church will be a place that tries to accommodate the world and accommodate the very things that are causing men to leave the Democratic Party, and whether we'll or where the church will cultivate a place where men can feel like they belong. Good morning, Lucas. How you doing, my man? Chloe's here. All right, good. Everybody, the usual crowd seems to be here. Good morning, Chloe. So, and I want to relate it. So in that podcast, I was basically summed up what I just said. And I likened or compared it to, or brought up a friend of mine's book in ministry called Church for Men, and the book, Why Men Hate Going to Church. And so it was basically, will the church, as culture moves away, now that we've been given social permission, or I guess social proof, I think is the official term for it, to reject the kind of woke, feminist-led things that have led to this recent election and the change in our society. Now that we've been given permission to move beyond those kinds of things, will the church do the same? Because the church has adapted so many of those kinds of things to try and appeal, to try and be relevant to the culture, letting the culture determine what we put forth as believers. So I want to follow that up with something I've been wanting to talk about for a little while, and that's the fourth turning. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the fourth turning. And basically, let me add this to the stage here. And what the fourth turning is a theory that historical events shape generations, and then the generations shape historical events. And it's and the history, I guess history rhymes, they call it, or rhythms. In American history, anyways, this is talking about American history, how the founding of our nation, obviously the American Revolution, in basically say 1780, 1775 to 1783. So just say 1783 when the nation actually begins. And then 80 years later, here comes the Civil War. So we have a generational crisis here and a generational crisis here in the Civil War 80 years later. 80 years after the Civil War, we have World War II, roughly 80 years. Another existential generational crisis. And this number here, 1945, is exactly 80 years from where we are now. So, and what it talks about every generation having seasons or cycles, and they compare a cycle of a generation, and they compare it to seasons. So when after one of the turnings, say the most recent one was World War II. So after World War II, my generation was born, and we were on a high. We were in spring. And then, so spring, all things are new, everything's optimistic, things are growing, society is on a high. And then summer comes and things really get going. And fall, it all starts to unravel. And in the winter, we have the crisis. So for the baby boomers, this would have been spring highs when we were born, to the 50s, maybe the awakening, the 60s. Ideas start to change in the awakening. The ideas that formed the high in the spring start to change in the summer. And that happened like 60s, 70s, where obviously my generation, that was a big, I think my generation was a little different than the previous generations, because we totally rejected the ideas of our parents' generation, grandparents' generations. Before that, I don't think it was so much that. It was more political, like between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. They didn't reject the ideas, the morals, and the faith of the previous generations. They just rejected the structure of things, which led to the Civil War. But after World War II, I think in the awakening, some ideas started to form that were really counter to what our parents believed. And then that caused an unraveling in the 70s. And then now we have the crisis years later. And I think the question has been asked, did we just go through the fourth turning with the lockdowns, with this and this, right? My little pantomimes there. So are we in the middle of it? First, was the pandemic lockdowns, was that all part of it? This world crisis we had. And how are we in it now? Did we just come out of it with last elections? What's the status of things? There's also another kind of maxim out there, a quote. I think it was a quote from a novel years ago about the strong man, weak man cycle. And I think it lines up with fourth turnings vaguely. And if you don't know that, I haven't got a graphic for it, but it's basically strong men. I'm sorry. Well, let's start with bad times. Bad times, because it's the first turning, makes strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make bad times. And then the cycle starts again. The bad times will make strong men. So let's see, what do we got here? Carrie says, I believe the church is lost. I'm not sure they can find their way back home. Yeah, you and me both, Carrie. I'll be getting to that a little bit later. And yes, obviously there are still some that are good. There's always a remnant that doesn't bow the knee, right? So God always saves that remnant for himself. Oh, here we go. Lucas, what do you got? Hard times create strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men create difficult times. Yeah. That's basically it. Just a little bit different wording. And, I saw it with my, my parents, and this, the whole fourth turning was a book. Let me see if I'm not sure I can remember who wrote the book, but let's see. The authors of the book, Strauss and Howe, the two guys, Strauss and Howe are the guys who wrote the book. When they first got this idea to write this book, they looked at the GI generation, basically the World War II generation, and the baby boomers, and how they could possibly be so different. And that's what was the genesis of this theory and then they started looking back. But again, I don't think the founding fathers were that different than the generation after them. that led to the Civil War. That was more an economic, political structure. The differences between my parents' generation and my generation were moral and worldview, and in a lot of ways reality, because our reality was so different from theirs. The reality of the founding fathers was not that much different. World reality, the lifestyles, the technology, things. I guess the Industrial Revolution was starting, which I guess did cause a major upheaval in society, but it didn't really, all that didn't really take hold until the turn of the 20th century, I think. So I think that was more just the political things that are sowed at the beginning, at the founding of the country, that eventually led to the Civil War. So I think those people kept it going as long as they could before that the Civil War happened. So so that's why it appeals to me, because anybody that's ever listened to me knows that's one of my talking points, is the differences, how my generation was so much different than the GI World War II generation, and how that has filtered down into the generations to come. So you've got this idea that every 80 years or so, I think the Romans had the term a saeculum, which is basically a human life, a good long human life, anywhere between 80 and 100 years. So let's see what Lucas has to say here. Gary, church has become nothing more than a numbers 501c3. Yeah, the tax bracket that dictates where the pulpit is going. You're not wrong. You're really not wrong. That's a big. It's a big concern, and the churches I've been at, that's always been a tension. They're always under this thing of, do we lose our 501c3 status? Do we, our tax exempt status? And do we risk that? Especially here in California, that's a big reality here in California. On a lot of different ways, not just the tax. That's a federal thing, but there's that plus all the other things, and we saw that in that thing. That's what happened, and that was a good indication. And I talk about this all the time too. A good indication of which churches will stay strong and which churches will probably be more tempted to compromise, are the ones that didn't shut their doors down, are the ones that probably going to stay faithful to the Word of God through tough times. The ones that did, in order to appease the world, again, who showed, I said this before, the churches that closed down show a hostile government. We will shut ourselves down. You don't have to come in with guns, and you don't have to come in with padlocks and shut our church down. If you put enough pressure on us, we will shut ourselves down. And that was the worst message we could possibly send. And but there weren't, like I said, there was a remnant of churches that did not do that. And my wife and I found them. Our church, huge church in this area, said, we're going to shut down, and we're going to show the world we love it by shutting ourselves down. I've talked about that before. So my wife said, we got to find a church that's not doing that. We got to find the church that's not being disobedient to God, that's not forsaking the assembling of the saints, just because society and government are pressuring them to do so. And we did. There were several churches in this area. We finally found one that stuck. And Doug Wilson recently was talking about this when he was talking about the fourth turning, that it's going to create two different types of men. The type that will put their finger to the wind and read society and try and appease society. And they're the ones who will not do that and who will stay true to the Word of God. When tough times come, there's two different reactions. You can either, let society dictate where you're going, and society does not want to hear the gospel. It does not want to hear us preach the gospel. And so you will tend to appease it and come up with excuses as to why you can't be obedient to the Word of God and continue preaching. And those are the majority of men right now. We have weak men. We have weak men. We had weak men in society. We still do. But society is, in our political and secular society right now, that is just beginning to be remedied. And, say what you want about Donald Trump, but he is a strong man and he is a strong male leader, and people are responding to it because we had in the last 4 years for sure, but in the last 5 to 20 years, society has begun to be fed up with all the weak man ideas, the weak, empty man ideas that we've had to suffer. And we needed someone like Donald Trump to come along and say, you have permission to reject this. And you have permission now to elect and look to strong men for leadership. And again, last week I talked about the patriarchy. We're the only patriarchy, or the first patriarchy in the West. The first patriarchy is to let women thrive and give women the empowerment that they think they want. But again, it was like everything. It went too far, and men got weak about it, and so we ended up with a feminist dominated society that was unsatisfying to just about everyone, because it's not satisfying to the feminists either. They're not happy, right? So men are not happy, women are not happy, because when men are weak, trouble comes, right? That's the weak men make bad times, right? The easy times are, we were so after the 1980s, and this time of prosperity was just amazing up until recently. And it just made weak men, because we could be weak. And, I think technology has a lot to do with it too, has made men weak. So in that realm, in the political and social realm, we're starting to see the strong man maybe emerge. And I certainly hope so. Will we see it in the church? I don't know, but again, this is a decision time. But there is one wild card I want to throw in that might break this cycle and might lead us into unknown territory. And that was a podcast I did a couple of weeks ago about young people not becoming adults. And I don't know if I know you guys were here for it, but whoever else out there, when this goes to tape, go look that up if you would, because it talks about young people not getting married, having children, buying homes, settling down as families. And there was a quote, Doug Wilson, a video I saw him do. He quoted an ancient proverb or ancient saying or whatever. And it might not even be ancient. It probably is more recent. But the quote goes, societies are built by men struggling to feed their families. So the thing that makes a society, the thing that makes a thriving society, is young men getting married, having children, and working their lives to feed their wife and children. And if society abandons the whole idea of a family, the whole idea of wife and children, men and women, if men give up the idea of being a husband and having a wife and children to feed, and if women give up the idea of marrying a man and having children with him so that he can support them and they can raise that family, then all of a sudden you don't have the generational cycle. Okay. You don't have generations anymore. And what do you do? Because we're in generational decline right now. And America has finally reached the point where we're not reaching replacement rate for children. So what's going to happen then? What's going to happen to this generational cycle? What's going to happen to the strong man, weak man cycle? When ungodly men rule, people groan. When the righteous reign, the people rejoice. Yes. And that I had a bunch of Bible verses that I was going to go through. And yes, that is one of them. The Bible has all kinds of verses about strong men and what makes a strong man. Okay. we've got, and there is a common theme in it, and it's not what most people would think, but I'm sure you guys, okay, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Isaiah, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They'll renew their strength if they hope in the Lord. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will not walk and not faint. 2 Corinthians 12:19. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Oh, that's interesting. Therefore, I will boast more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Psalm. It is God whose arms me with strength. It keeps my way secure. So you get the idea. When it comes to, you were going to remove. Okay, there we go. What makes a strong man? It's reliance on God, right? And putting your faith in the one who gives us strength. And Carrie, what do you have to say here? Women are a mess. They want a man to support them. At the same time, they want them to be home with the family. That's, I've got it covered. I have 3 sons and 2 daughters. The 2 oldest are dedicated to the Lord. I feed them the Bible every morning and pray for them all the time. Well, you're a strong man, Lucas. You are that. You are the definition of a strong man, then, Lucas, if you're doing that. Matter of fact, today I am nominating Lucas for King of all men for the day. Because that's, again, that our society is everything our society has told us. And everything, I have a daughter who's engaged and getting married in this summer. And she's, you're welcome, King Lucas. So she's getting married and she struggles with this. She's always been pretty much a traditional girl, but she's got all these voices in her head talking about, having a career and, not here just to have babies and, and that's creeped into the church too. A lot of the church has these messages too, even though, a lot of us are strong, conservative, maybe Christian believers. It doesn't mean our kids are going to be that way. So I'm skewed here in California because so much of culture here is just dominating. The remnant in California is very weak, and the churches around here used to be strong, but then again, the lockdowns really took it out of us. And like I said, the remnant is not as strong as it should be. Robin's here. So good to see you, Robin. Yeah, it's been quite a party too. So, yeah, I'm sure you have, but yeah, that's what makes a strong man, right? So, so I think it's going to be interesting to see where things go. I always give out the famous curse, may you live in interesting times. We have interesting times here, but this is what God put us here for. And this is, like Doug Wilson was saying, when you see hard times, how do you react? Do you stay strong and still preach the gospel and still hold to the gospel, still raise your children in the gospel, still take responsibility as a man? When you're a woman, do you want a man to do that? Will your children listen to you? Will they be able to resist society's constant, parading of them, constantly drilling in these anti-Christian notions? So let's see. AC, what do you got? Well, my boys are getting up there in age and are not married nor have children. But since they turned 18, I've told them to make sure they don't become baby daddies. I think it's stuck. My fault. Well, not really. I don't think that's a fault of yours to say that. But no, that is, but AC, I'm sorry, you're right. Their young men are not, marriage to them is, a lot of them is not an option. We have a son like that. We don't think he's going to get married. And he doesn't think he is either. A lot of them have been scared away from marriage. These, a lot of young men think, why would I get married? It's when, I can marry a woman, have kids, and then she divorces me. I lose custody of the kids. I can't see my kids. And plus I'm giving 80% of my salary in child support. All these stories um, have been going out there. Society. It led to the MGTOW, been going their own way movement from a few years back. Um, so, yeah, Carrie, I think, I said Carrie, so two completely different scenarios. Yeah. So, and then I take responsibility for the woman that I am because I know what a woman is. Sorry, just had to throw it in there. No, that's, yeah. And that's a whole nother conversation. I can only speak authoritatively on what a man is because I've been one for so long. So, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And I think the interesting question this all brings up to me is, if this theory, this fourth turning theory of generations, is correct, and it basically it gives a name to a phenomenon that's happened in our history. So in that sense, it is about every 80 years we have the existential crisis. So, and certainly what's happened in the last 5 years has been an existential crisis. And it certainly has been for me. Nothing has rocked me in my life harder than the last 5 years. But going forward, I'm wondering how that's going to hold up if the generations are not replacing themselves. There's different characteristics of each generation, but at least they were generations. This is the first time in history people have stopped reproducing themselves. And maybe just fundamentally down to that for the church. Are we encouraging our kids, AC, or I'm sorry, yeah, AC, you encourage your boys not to have children out of wedlock, but I'm sure you still wanted them to have children, get married and have children. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see this new phenomenon of a generation not replacing itself, and who's going to be left. In this part of the country, are people reproducing themselves, and the Hispanic populations are very much so here. And if the future is theirs, the future is theirs. If they have that mentality, what will that mean? A new culture, a new cultural dynamic for this part of at least for this part of the country. So it's going to be interesting as we look ahead. Again, there's going to be hard times. We've had the weak men have created the hard times. Things are looking up politically and culturally, but I'm not completely sold because there's some things down the road that I don't think we're out of the woods yet. And so what strong men are going to continue to emerge from this generation, and what strong men are going to emerge in the church? The only ones I've really seen are from my generation, the older generation. I'm looking for some younger, good, strong Christian leaders from the younger generation. There are a few out there, but boy, they get a hard time. They're under a lot of pressure to cave to the world and the pressures of the world. Chloe, from a secular point of view, I've done some research on the stopping of reproduction. Other countries are way outmaneuvering us on reproduction, primarily Islamic countries. Yep. And that's a whole nother aspect of it. That's worldwide. And yes. And what's that going to look like worldwide? But again, if they have the ethic and the mindset to reproduce themselves, and they don't, we have ceded the future to them. And but again, God's in control. Even if that does happen, or whatever happens, we need to stay faithful to the gospel. We need to stay preaching the word. and be the ones that that stay strong. And what will we have? Wood, hay, and stubble, or will we have strong foundations? So that I've gone a little bit over again, but thanks for listening. Big topic. We could talk about it for another hour, I'm sure. So thanks for listening all, and I will see you probably tomorrow with Ben and Michael.